recording. All right, so that being said, let's get into the lab portion of the endocrine system. All right, so this is where I would say I highly urge you to do those soft chalk exercises that are found in your course content folders in regards to your atlas labeling, because I have some of the slides up here. All right, and I will show you some of the slides, but it won't be like I've done in the past, in which we go through one individual slide, with one term on it. Okay, we just really don't have much time to do that. But again, we do have fewer items. So if you have everything pre-labeled, then you can just double check everything and see, okay, and then just ask me questions. And so it saves us some time here. So let's talk about our endocrine glands. Now this slide should look familiar to you because we talked about it in lecture. Okay, so just a quick review. All right, when we're dealing with the location of some of these glands, all right, well, first of all, what tissue makes up an endocrine gland? Epithelial tissue, all right, that is going to have connective tissue involvement, all right, mainly for the framework, or what we call the stroma, okay? So to reiterate this point that I made previously, some of our glands, all right, are purely endocrine organs, which means all they do, all right, is endocrine functions. They're going to secrete hormones, okay? Then we have endocrine cells, all right, that are going to be found clustered in organs throughout your body, okay? And those organs that they're found in have other functions, okay? Like your skin, for example, has many other functions than the endocrine functions, okay? Of all the different tissues that are in your skin, all right? Think of all the functions that skin serves. One, it prevents dehydration, offers protection, okay? So we'll see, all right, endocrine cells found within the heart. All right, because believe it or not, your heart does secrete a hormone. Okay, so we'll get into all this stuff. All right, so just keep that in mind. Some endocrine organs, purely endocrine function. All right, endocrine cells are also found in other organs that are not purely endocrine in function. Okay, so here's that slide again. All right, with where we'll find these organs in endocrine cells. All right, your major endocrine glands. All right, pituitary, big time. All right, the pineal and the thyroid. Those three, all right, are purely endocrine function. Okay, on the right side of our screen, we'll see some of these organs and tissues that contain endocrine glands, but they have other functions. All right, and you can see that long list there. Okay. All right, so let's jump into two of the big, all right, endocrine structures, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Okay, so if we had to create a hierarchy, all right, of our endocrine system, at the tippy top, all right, would be our hypothalamus. Okay, that's the king or the queen. Okay, that's tip top. Immediately below that is the pituitary gland. Okay. And then below that, we have various other, all right, glands. Thyroid, adrenal, liver, testes, ovaries. Okay? So if we were to be a military, the hypothalamus would be our commanding officer. And then or if we're on a boat, let's say, the captain of the boat would be the hypothalamus. And then the first mate is the pituitary gland. And then the thyroid, the adrenal, liver, intestine, and ovaries, those are like the crewmates. Okay? So another name for the pituitary gland is the hypothalamus. Okay, now if you remember, okay, the positioning of these structures, because it wasn't too long ago, hopefully for everybody, it wasn't too long ago when you learned where these structures were, okay, when we were mapping out the brain. Okay, where the pituitary gland was in relation to the hypothalamus, and that there was a connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. But the pituitary gland, all right, is inferior to the hypothalamus. And the structure that it lived in was the Turkish saddle, otherwise known as the sella turcica. So if we looked at it from the side, it looked like this. And so the pituitary gland sat right down in there. And then there was this stalk-like structure that came off. And if you remember, there was a piece of connective tissue, all right, that covered the pituitary gland, okay, and it protected it, okay, and that was referred to as the diaphragma sellae. If you ask me to spell it for you, you're going to be very disappointed in my spelling, all right? So all this is located in the sphenoid bone, okay? So keep in mind, the pituitary gland is directly connected to the hypothalamus through the infundibulum. Its nickname is also known as the pituitary stalk. I'll show you a picture here in a second, okay? So we've divided our pituitary gland into two sections, a front and a back, or the anterior pituitary or the posterior pituitary, okay? So there's two parts to that, an anterior pituitary and a posterior pituitary. All right. So another name for the posterior pituitary, right, which you also, please, you need to know this, is the neurohypophysis. Okay. Remember, the hypophysis, the hypophysis is the name for the pituitary gland, and the posterior pituitary is known as the neurohypophysis. And so therefore, that is considered to be the neural part of the pituitary gland, which I'll explain in a second here. Okay? I'm going to come right back, all right, to this slide. Don't worry. All right? The other part of the pituitary gland is the anterior pituitary. Okay? And the anterior pituitary is known as the adenohypophysis. The adenohypophysis, okay, or adeno. I'll try to spell it for you guys. Adeno. All right, I'm not going to write out the hypothesis. All right, adeno or adeno. Okay, that's the anterior pituitary. Okay, so again, I'll come back to that. Are we still graded on spelling? Yes, of course, yes. We are always graded on spelling. Okay, check out the grading rubrics that will tell you. For the most part, all right, I know. Trust me. It makes a difference though, especially when you're dealing with ileum and ileum. All right, ileum you can have being the last portion of the small intestine, but it also refers to one of the three bones that makes up your innominate or your os coxa or the coxal bone. So again, spelling is crucial. Okay, they both sound the same, all right, but the spelling's different and they actually represent different structures. So that's a big reason why. Okay. Even though if you ask a lot of people that are in the medical profession, a lot of them can't spell worth of crap. And I'm one of them, kind of, sort of. I actually need to write the word down. It's hard for me to see the spelling in my head. I'm weird like that. So that's what we're looking at here. This picture here is showing us, here's the hypothalamus up here. Okay, and then down below we have the pituitary gland. And our infundibulum connects the two. Okay, so on the back portion is the posterior pituitary or the neurohypophysis, and on the front is the anterior pituitary, the adeno or adenohypophysis. Easy to remember. A, anterior, A, all right, adeno or adeno. Okay? All right, so let's jump back to the posterior pituitary here. Okay? In the posterior pituitary, and in that picture that I just showed you, which I'll go back to in a moment, all right, you've got these neurons that travel, All right, the bodies of these neurons are located in the hypothalamus. But these neurons, all right, project from the hypothalamus, all right, down into the posterior pituitary. They have to travel through, all right, the infundibulum. So the interesting thing is, all right, the somas, the bodies of these neurons, they make the hormones. And then they ship them off, all right, down into, all right, the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland will then release, all right, or secrete those hormones. So you got to be really careful. We'll talk about all that in a moment. All right, you got to be really careful with the wording when you're reading a question. And anytime it mentions the posterior pituitary, you better read that question really close. Because if it says synthesize, that the posterior pituitary synthesizes, I'm running out of room. All right. The posterior pituitary does not synthesize oxytocin, all right, and antidiuretic hormone, all right, ADH. We'll get into that in a second. All right. It will secrete them and it will release them, but it doesn't make them. That's what synthesize means. So again, we'll get into that. Trust me, trust me. All right. So, but you do want to know this. All right. When we're dealing here, all right, with the cell bodies, the somas, all right, they're located, and you need to know these, in the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus and the supraoptic nucleus of the hypothalamus. There's many nuclei up there in the hypothalamus, but the two of note, all right, for chapter 17, all right, are going to be the paraventricular and the supraoptic, okay? So both of these nuclei will have neurons projecting from them down through the infundibulum, and they're going to travel in this, remember this term, a tract? All right, if you remember, a tract is a bundle of axons in the central nervous system. Okay? A bundle of axons in the central nervous system. A nucleus is a cluster of what? The answer's there on the board. What is it a cluster of? Come on, my brains. Hook a brother up. Type in an answer for me. Well, yes, neurons, but what part of the neuron? Remember, a tract is the axons, whereas a nucleus is what part of the neuron? Dendrites, which are a part of the cell bodies. Okay? Yeah, the cell bodies. Okay? Or soma. Soma means cell body. Okay? I know I'm going to clean out these cobwebs one way or another, people. They're coming out of you. All right? They're coming out of you. All right? And then the synaptic knobs, okay, that's the end of these neurons, are going to be found in the pars nervosa, and that's going to be down in, all right? Wait, what'd that say? I'm getting there, I hope. You're getting there, trust me. You know me. You know me. I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to hold your hand. Not all the way, but I'm going to help you. All right. All right, where are we? Okay, so jumping down here to our picture, okay, zoom in a little bit. That's too much. Okay, so here you can see you've got your paraventricular nucleus and your supraoptic nucleus. Okay, you do want to know this. The paraventricular, all right, is going to synthesize oxytocin. The supraoptic nucleus makes ADH, antidiuretic hormone. Okay? Antidiuretic hormone. Got to know that. So you can remember POSA. I don't know how you'd want to pronounce that. All right, paraventricular makes oxytocin. The supraoptic makes ADH. Okay, post is a good one. All right, some people will do SAOP. It's close to soap, but I don't want you to confuse that. So that's why I never use that one, because it's easy. It's easy to mess up with soap. All right, so the hypothalamus is going to synthesize or produce both ADH, the antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. It's a great test question, and it's a good test question to mess up. Okay, so there's some there's some teachers out there that like to, I don't want to say trick you, but it's a challenging concept to remember, you know, because you think that if something is going to secrete a hormone, that it made that hormone. Okay, this situation, no. Okay, so the hypothalamus synthesized, it made the oxytocin, and it made the antidiuretic hormone, and then it ships it down here, all right, into the posterior pituitary, the neurohypophysis, where it stores it and releases it or secretes it. Okay, make sure you're aware of your synonyms. Okay, various words that you can use to describe the same thing. Okay, so when it travels through the infundibulum, it's traveling through what we call the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. It's a lot, but it just tells you hypothalamus and the hypophysis. All right, one is this guy here, the first part, the hypothalamo, and then the second part, hypophyseal, has to do with the hypophysis or the pituitary gland. Okay? So we call that the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. It's a lot. It's a mouthful. It's not easy. It's not even easy for me to say, okay? And I teach this stuff. All right. So we're going to learn about different types of circulatory systems later on. And one is called a portal system, and we'll learn the definition of that, but we're not going to do it now because we have the circulatory chapter to learn that, okay? But the hypothalamo-hypophyseal, all right, portal system, all right, is one of those systems, all right, that we'll learn about later on. But it's basically involving blood vessels, okay? When we are talking about, let me backtrack because I probably lost some of you here, all right? The hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract deals with the posterior or neurohypophysis or the posterior pituitary gland. Okay, so that's all. Just think of nervous tissue. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the anterior pituitary. So think posterior having to do with nervous tissue. The anterior pituitary is going to have to do with blood. Okay, now we're talking about a different part of the pituitary gland. Okay, so now we're going to deal with the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. Okay, so it has all these blood vessels that are basically going to connect the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary or the adenohypophysis. Okay. So it's made up of three components. All right, the three components involve two plexuses or plexi and then one grouping of veins. So the primary plexus makes sense. It's located in the hypophysis because remember, the hypophysis is our commander. It's our number one. Okay, easy to remember. The secondary plexus, our number two, our second mate on our ship, has to do with the anterior pituitary. Okay? So these are capillary networks. Now, this is very, very important that you understand this. The primary plexus is made up of a porous capillary network. And that's important because when the hypothalamus makes its hormones, All right, it makes two types of hormones, which we'll get into detail more in lecture. Okay, it makes releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones. Okay, but regardless, it's got to get its hormones into the blood. So it makes sense, all right, that these capillaries are porous so the hormones can get in. So they get into our porous capillary network in the hypothalamus, and they're going to travel down to the anterior pituitary. Okay? Well, in order to get there, they've got to go through the hypophyseal portal veins. Okay? And it's just this plexus, a grouping of blood vessels, that transports the hormones made in the primary, in the hypophysis, all right, that get pumped into the primary plexus, and it transports those hormones to the secondary plexus, located in the anterior pituitary. Okay, so let's take a peek. Take a look at this picture. All right, the hypophyseal portal system, and you can see here, all right, here we've got our primary plexus, okay, and that is going to allow, all right, and it's porous, it's going to allow, all right, all these hormones that were made and being released in the hypothalamus to enter into the portal system here and go from the hypothalamus down here, all right, into the anterior pituitary. Okay, and then it causes the anterior pituitary to release its hormones. Okay, so we'll get into some of the details about this. If you want to take a look here, and you can see, all right, a list of some of the hormones that the hypothalamus actually makes and releases. Okay, thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH, that's going to help us to release thyroxine down the road. Prolactin releasing hormone, prolactin inhibiting hormone. Remember, there's two classifications of hormones that will be released from the hypothalamus. Either they'll be releasing hormones, which will encourage other glands to release their hormones, or they'll be inhibiting hormones. They'll prevent hormones from circulating. Okay? Then you got the gonadotropin releasing hormone, the corticotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone. There's a bunch. We'll get into more detail in lecture. Okay? And then you can see this list here of all these hormones that if they're stimulated to release by the hypothalamus, that the anterior pituitary gland will release, while it's also making these hormones. Okay, you saw up here, I want to draw attention to this, you saw up here in the hypothalamus, we have releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones. In the pituitary, we have stimulating hormones. All right, basically, all right, these hormones like TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is going to stimulate the thyroid to release thyroxine. Okay? But again, that's a story for lecture. All right, I hope you have your atlases close by. Now, what I've done in the lab section is I've mixed in slides into the actual lecture-like material here that I'm presenting to you. So this is going to be our first slide, okay, that you were responsible for identification, okay, for the test. So this should be in your atlas. I have no idea what page it's on, okay. I'm sure one of you guys knows. 59, said Casey. All right. So, and again, this is a new slide, but again, this isn't new material for you because you already know the hypothalamus. I'll show you on another slide where that is. All right, the hypothalamus is up here, okay, and then in front and below the hypothalamus is the optic chiasm or the optic chiasma. And I'm going to draw this out while some of you might be labeling here. So here's one eyeball. Here's the other eyeball. And then projecting back from each eyeball, all right, is the optic nerve. What cranial nerve number is the optic nerve? You thought you could get away and not remember that stuff? Anybody know? Yes, that's right. How many eyeballs do you got, Jim? I got 2 eyeballs. Well, therefore, you got cranial nerve number 2. That's the optic one, okay? So, where both the optic nerve, and for those of you that are new to me, you will learn that I have horrible artistry skills. I'm awful. Those of you that have had me before, I'm sorry, again, okay? So anyways, here comes one cranial nerve, the other cranial nerve, the optic nerves. Where they cross over right here, that's the optic chiasm. And so we're looking at the optic chiasm, all right, from the side view, okay? So the optic chiasm sits above the pituitary gland, okay, but below the hypothalamus. So that's this whole structure here. That's your optic chiasm. All right, number 3 is the infundibulum. That's what's connecting the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. And then 6, the whole thing, is the pituitary gland, okay? So now, question is, how do I know which is anterior and which is posterior? A couple different ways. The posterior pituitary is smaller because it's only going to be holding on to 2 hormones, all right, oxytocin and ADH. That's how I kind of remembered it. And then the anterior pituitary it makes and releases all these hormones, so it's going to be bigger. Okay, the optic chiasm is in front, so this is this is anterior, and back here is posterior. Okay, so you could say the neurohypothesis for the posterior pituitary, but you can also write in there posterior pituitary. Okay, that's up to you. All right, and then in the front here, number 5, that's the adenohypothesis, or the anterior pituitary. Okay? All right, not too bad, not too bad. All right, you guys are doing awesome. Is this a decent pace? Is this okay? Probably seems a lot slower than, yeah, probably does seem a lot slower than what 210 was. It'll pick up a little bit more, but like I said, we got time. All right, so this slide here, figure 1712, I am going to encourage you folks to take this slide and turn it into flashcards. It's a good exercise to do, but memorize this page, this figure, okay? I'll zoom in a little bit. This figure, I mean, this is just the basis. It's basic information, but it gets a little bit more. So it's figure 17, all right, point 12, okay? And it basically tells you, all right, all the anterior pituitary hormones that are being secreted, all right, and pretty much what is being secreted by the hypothalamus. So again, the print is small on here, so it's kind of, well, it's still pretty tough, all right? But here you can see all the releasing hormones and the inhibiting hormones. Remember, there's 2 classifications of hormones being released from the hypothalamus: releasing, inhibiting. Okay, and this is giving you, all right, all those hormones. And then it color coordinates them to these boxes here. Okay, so you can see, for example, growth hormone has a releasing hormone, but it also has an inhibiting hormone. All right. Okay, kind of neat. Prolactin has a releasing hormone. It also has an inhibiting hormone, and you can kind of see it here. So these color-coordinated boxes will help for you to see, all right, these tissues, these organs have both a releasing hormone and an inhibiting hormone, and then these have just a releasing hormone. We'll go through this in much more detail, all right? But I would encourage you guys to really get to understand this relationship here. Okay, because this is explaining to you that the hypothalamus is then going to stimulate, all right, the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone. And then this gives you a little bit of an explanation of what thyroid stimulating hormone does. But one of the interesting parts, if you go way down here to the bottom of the page, it's tough to see, guys. So you'll have to go and look on your in your book or whatnot. All right. is this whole, I mean, it's real basic. There's a lot more detail to this, but this is the bare bones, bare minimum. If you understand this, then learning the detailed stuff, it becomes a little bit easier. But this basically explains to you that, all right, TRH, the thyrotropin releasing hormone, is going to stimulate the anterior pituitary to release its thyroid stimulating hormone. It also gives its name, thyrotropin. All right, and then the thyrotropin, or the thyroid stimulating hormone, is then going to stimulate the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone, TH. And then it gives kind of a little blurb of what it does. Okay, so then in some of these little write-ups, it gives a sequence of the hormone release, which I like. All right, TRH causes the release of TSH, which causes the release of TH. Okay, so some of these have, all right, these sequence. So I would start off with this because it's a lot of information. Okay, and it can get confusing and overwhelming. But if you start, remember what I say, KISS principle, keep it simple. Okay, try to keep it simple, understand the basics, then build upon that and worry about the detail later. Okay, so this is a good place to start. Chapter 17, excuse me, obviously chapter 17, but figure 1712. All right, and then you can actually, I had students make flashcards. They said it helped them tremendously. Okay, all right. Let's look at our atlas again. This looks very familiar, I'm sure, to a lot of you, all right, when we were doing the brain anatomy. And again, this is showing us some of the structures back here, all right. Part of the diencephalon is the pineal gland. Remember the three parts to the diencephalon? The thalamus, the hypothalamus, all right. And then we had our pineal gland, which was part of the epithalamus, along with the habenular nucleus, all right. All right, here is your hypothalamus here. And then obviously the pituitary gland down here. Now, is it just me, or does this kind of look like a duck? Like here's the bill, here's the eye. Doesn't that kind of look like a duck to some of you? Here's the top of the head of the duck. Whoops. Yeah, I know there's some teachers that will draw that outline. I never did. Yeah, see? I realized this one night when I was drinking Jack Daniels and trying to make a slideshow for my lecture class. The more Jack Daniels I had, the more that looked like a duck to me. I'm kidding. I'm joking. All righty. Oh, you're shaking your head at me. Oh, sorry. All right. Next one here. Now we're going to zoom in a little bit and label a couple other structures here. Okay. So you can see the pituitary gland or the hypophysis. And again, you can use either or in your answer choices. Okay. This whole thing, number one. All right. Right here. That's the pituitary gland. All right. 1A, or not 1A, excuse me, 1C and 1B together makes up, all right, the pituitary gland. Okay. All right, so you can kind of see, here's that infundibulum, 1A, hypothalamus, number 2, and then way back here is the pineal gland. All right. Which, in case you forgot, is part of the epithalamus. And the epithalamus is part of your diencephalon. Okay, so let's jump into our first gland. And we saw this way back when, all right, when we were first learning, okay, the anatomy in 210. Okay, this gland is in close approximation to the trachea, your windpipe. Okay, it's our thyroid gland. Okay, so to locate it, easy to do. For some of us, a little bit easier. Males have a more pronounced thyroid cartilage, so it's a little bit easier to palpate out where, as a male, where our thyroid cartilage is. Okay, so the thyroid gland is going to be just below that. okay? And it sits on the front of your trachea. And it looks like the letter H, okay? So like this. Okay? So it has a left and a right lobe, and then this skinny portion here is the isthmus. And that crosses over in the front, okay? So now this is very important because we're going to talk about some of the specialized cells, and you need to know this. I'm going to promise you this right now. And I hope I'm right, all right, because the tests in 211, you know, they're randomized, obviously, okay? So you might get a test question, all right, that asks you to identify, all right, what cell makes thyroglobulin. So you need to know these things. Or what cell makes the hormone calcitonin, all right? So in our thyroid gland, okay, we have two types of cells that are worth mentioning. The first one is the follicular cells, all right? And these cells, if you remember back in chapter 5 when we were talking about the different type of epithelium, remember simple, and then there's stratified, and then the cell shapes, which were squamous and cuboidal and columnar, okay? Well, these cells are cuboidal shaped cells. They look like a cube, and the nucleus is directly in the center. It's a spherical shaped nucleus, okay? And so they make a big ring. And at the center of the ring is what we call a lumen. A lumen is a space. So here is my ring. In the space here in the center, that's the lumen. So in your blood vessel, where your blood flows, that's the lumen of the blood vessel. So here, all right, in the thyroid gland, all right, we have a whole bunch of cuboidal epithelial cells that make a big ring. All right, the center of that ring is the lumen. And in that lumen is thyroglobulin. Okay? So these cells make this thyroglobulin and they spit it into the center, into the lumen there. Okay? These same cells, great test question right here, will produce and release your thyroid hormone. Okay? Got it? Got it? Thyroid hormone, thyroglobulin, okay, helps, all right, with our metabolism. So at the center of our lumen, all right, anatomically, we call it colloid. And it's this thick substance, very much protein rich. Okay, it's viscous, thick, viscous fluid. What else is viscous? Remember the aqueous humor in your eyeball? That's viscous. Okay, so this colloid sits in the center of that lumen, and we'll talk about it. This is what helps us to synthesize and make our thyroid hormone, our thyroglobulin. Okay, so there's another set of cells in the thyroid gland, and so they're not in between the follicular cells in those follicles. They're outside the follicles, all right? So, or in between, well, I worded that horribly, all right? Scratch what I just said, that they're not in between the follicular cells, okay? So if you have, what I mean by that is you won't find the parafollicular cells, all right, anywhere inside this ring, or they're not a part of the ring. They're outside these rings. Okay, they're outside here. Okay, so they're between the follicles. So we call those parafollicular cells. Okay, they make, all right, remember this hormone, chapter 7, calcitonin. Easy to remember what it does. The first three letters are cal, C-A-L, standing for calcium. And what do they do with calcium? They put calcium in the bone, or put it in. Okay? So, when your blood calcium levels are high, these parafollicular cells pump out this calcitonin. The calcitonin inhibits osteoclast activity. So remember what osteoclasts do? They break down your bone matrix. So these prevent your bone matrix from being broken down, okay? So your blood calcium levels don't rise. So it inhibits their activity, but also, all right, it increases, okay, the level of urine excretion of calcium. So your kidneys will secrete out or excrete out calcium in your pee, okay? Gets rid of it. That's how I remembered it. Okay, I always thought of calcitonin puts calcium into bone. All right, but basically what it does is it prevents, all right, your osteoclasts from breaking down bone matrix. Okay, so when your blood calcium levels are high, okay, because we inhibited the osteoclasts, your osteoblasts can then, all right, put that calcium into the matrix. Okay. But also your kidneys will help to pee it out. All right, so here you can see a nice picture of the thyroid gland, all right, in our drawing. Here's the thyroid cartilage, and then just below it, you can see the thyroid gland. Heavily vascularized, lots of blood vessels, okay, which is good. All right, we need to get that hormone into circulation. Here you can see it in a live dissection. All right, here's your thyroid cartilage, okay, and then just below it here you can see your thyroid gland here. Okay, all right, let's knock out some labeling here real fast. All right, okay, a couple things. Okay, here's the hyoid bone. Remember, this is the only bone in your body that does not articulate with another bone. Okay, mainly it's just a site for muscular attachment. It sits in front of your give me a second here, C4, it's usually floats around C4, C5 vertebra, okay, muscles attached, it sits above the thyroid cartilage, okay. Then just below the thyroid cartilage, here's the isthmus, the narrowing portion of the thyroid gland, and then on either side, all right, you have your thyroid lobes here. Okay, and you have to be anatomically correct, you guys. All right. So if we're looking at it from this view, we can see here. All right, if you can see the hyoid bone, if you can see the thyroid cartilage, we're looking at it from the front. Okay, so if we're looking at it from the front, over here, all right, this is going to be the left, and this is going to be the right, anatomically, because this person is facing us. Okay, don't lose points like that, please. Please, please, please. All right. All right, now we're going to flip it over and look at it, all right, from the back here. Okay. So on the back, you see these four purple dots. Well, guess what? Those are what we refer to as the parathyroid glands. Remember, they're the gland that makes the PTH, parathyroid hormone. And what does parathyroid hormone do? It helps to increase blood calcium levels. One of the ways it does that is it prevents the kidneys from excreting calcium. So they'll reabsorb it. So you're not peeing it out. Okay? Also, parathyroid hormone works with vitamin D. Okay? Together, all right, they'll help to increase calcium from the digestive tract. Pretty cool. Pretty cool, pretty cool. All right, so just keep that in mind. Number 5 is the parathyroid glands. Okay? So you can see here, all right, here's an anterior view. Okay? And you can see the right and left thyroid lobes, and then we got our isthmus here. Okay? And if you look over here on the right side of your page, here's your kidney, and sitting right above it is the adrenal or suprarenal gland. Okay? And we'll get more into that in a bit. Almost done, you guys. Hang in there. You're doing well. Doing very well. Just give me 1 second here. All right. All right. So quick glance at the thyroid gland histology. Again, remember we referred to that one slide in chapter 5 in lab as glandular tissue or glandular epithelium, and it resembled cuboidal, simple cuboidal epithelium. Very similar, okay? So that's what we're seeing here. Here are our follicles, okay? Here's the ring, and that's lined by the follicular cells, okay? And they're going to synthesize and make our thyroid hormone. All right, and at the center of the follicle is our colloid. And we'll talk about all that in lecture, what the process of making the colloid and breaking it down. All right, outside, all right, of the follicle, all right, you will have glands on the outside sitting there, and those are our parafollicular cells right here on the outside, these little blue guys. Okay, and they're going to be responsible for the calcitonin. Now, if I zoom in here on that one, all right, you can see, all right, the parafollicular cells. Here's a good parafollicular cell. Okay, on the outside, here's another parafollicular cell. So if it's not in the wall of the follicle, all right, or immediately surrounding the colloid here, okay, if it's not that in that wall and it's outside, all right, that's a parafollicular cell. If it's on the inside, it's a follicular cell. Here's a better picture. That's kind of tough to see, but this one's in your book, in your study guide, or your atlas. All right, way easier. Okay, so all these simple cuboidal shaped cells, all right, those are all your follicular cells, okay? And they're going to be busy making your thyroid hormone. All right, get this a colloid here. And then just outside of that, here's a parafollicular cell, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. These parafollicular cells, all right, those are going to be the ones that are going to make the calcitonin. And since they make calcitonin, another name for them is C cell. Yeah, not seashells, C cells. Okay. All right. That seems like a good place to stop because this next slide. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Let me do one more because it's an identification slide. Okay, it's an identification slide. Booyah! All right, here you can just see another model here. Here you can see the parathyroid glands on the posterior portion here. All right, and then in our parathyroid glands, you've got two cell types, and we'll get into this stuff in lecture, so don't sweat it. All right, the darkly stained ones here, okay, those are the oxyphil cells, okay, and then the other cells that are much more abundant are the chief cells, also known as the principal cells. I'll give you a chance, and this is the last slide, okay, I'll give you a chance to write that down. In lecture, if we have to, if we get to it before the next lab, we'll talk about how we make thyroid hormone, how we store it, and how we release it. Okay, we'll get into that. All right, y'all. Is there any questions about anything so far? I like the pace. It's nice and even keel. All right, not too much material, but when I say relatively not too much material.